Welcome to Voice of Africa Radio once again. I am in the studio, as I did say earlier on, with Elizabeth Jones, UKIP, Mahmoud, Fiaz, Liberal Democrat, and we would be joined by Lembit very soon on the telephone to do the discussion on important issues that really matter most. We will be speaking, as I said earlier on, we will be discussing the London exodus to Dartford in the constituency of Elizabeth Jones. What is going on? Within 5 years, it has been predicted that London will get closer and closer to Dartford, which will put strain on the all the services, including schools and health service, and housing will also be very, very scarce in that constituency, and the consequences of it on the dwellers or the settlers of Dartford. Elizabeth is in the studio with me. Elizabeth, good evening, and thank you for joining us on Voice of Africa Radio. As a prospective parliamentary candidate for Dartford, and the rate at which people are being moved from London to Dartford, what is the impact or implications of the mass exodus of people from London to Dartford on the constituency Dartford?
Well, at this stage, Dartford UKIP would oppose Dartford becoming a London borough and leaving the Kent County Council. However, long term, it's really a question of what the local constituents want. We've got a situation where basically the Dartford citizens have access to most transport. You can use an Oyster card on all Dartford buses, but not the trains. As of December 2016, you'll be able to use your Oyster card on the trains. You have Freedom Pass, whereby after 9:30 a.m. till 11 p.m., if you're of retirement age or have qualification through disability or being a student, you can also use the pass to travel from London to Dartford. So a lot of the transport implications of not being in London Borough don't really face Dartford as yet. Also, Dartford's leading the way with regard to river crossing. At the moment, you're going to have to pay. If you cross the river east of Rotherhithe, you're going to have to pay. If you're crossing Thames east of Rotherhithe, you will have to pay. And the TfL are actually copying Dartford's charging structure. So Dartford's leading the way there. Not much of a sort of advantage, but it's something that we are leading the way there. So I don't think for the foreseeable future Dartford will become a London borough. I don't think that that's necessarily what the citizens want, because of course there is the problem that the Dartford citizens won't want to share their social housing list with the whole of London. At the moment, about 97.5% of the social housing in Dartford is in fact occupied by local people, and I think it is the intention of the local people to keep it that way. So I don't think it'll move forward to London Borough for any time for the foreseeable future. Furthermore, people talk much about the possible financial investment if Dartford comes within the fold of the London Borough. Well, if we look at Hackney and Stratford, those two areas didn't really benefit from any significant funding until 2012 Olympics. Before then, they were not really blessed with significant capital infrastructure input.
But one will ask that all the investment that were put into east of London, how did the people benefit from the investment that the government put into it prior to Olympics and after the Olympics?
Well, prior to the Olympics, I don't think there was a very significant investment into Hackney and Stratford. After the Olympics, as you can see, I've just come through Stratford tube station, so the area is a bit more vibrant, very well lit, better supplied with shops. You've got an excellent shopping centre now in Stratford. So that's really resulted, kick-started by the Olympics, not because they're part of a London borough.
Well, Mahmoud, as a housing or a mortgage advisor, housing advisor and a politician, so now people going to Dartford, leaving London for Dartford, what benefit would Dartford get as a result of people leaving London to settle in Dartford?
Good evening to you and to your listeners, Adam, and Arbagani to the Swahili-speaking listeners. It's really nature of the beast. Regardless of what country you're in, cities naturally have a tend to get bigger and bigger and start gobbling up. If a city is getting smaller, that means the country is really finished. So just to go about what Elizabeth said about Stratford, actually it's not the Olympics. What happened, the idea about the English partnership and how to develop Stratford, what invested it would be needed, and what infrastructure, was actually back in the 1990s. And I was on the Stratford Development Committee. That's how I know. And all this was in the pipeline and quite a lot of it. And obviously when the Olympics came, it gave a good opportunity to bring the infrastructure in. And hence, the other one, like I said to you, the cities get bigger and bigger. I'll give you an example where close to where I live, in Leighton. Exeter County Cricket Ground is actually in Leighton. Even Walthamstow was part of Essex County. But now as cities get bigger and bigger, they tend to have gobbled things up. Obviously, there are advantages in this one. Advantage clearly is that, like I said, 97% of house owners is a static. It adds good...
but we know that it will be bigger. But have we, or has any proper investment been put into Dartford before we can put strain on already existing infrastructure? They talk about the services, the housing and education, health. Has there been any proper investment that we expect?
As infrastructure takes place, better railway, better transport, better motorways, better road connections, that's how it gets gobbled up and taken into the city, almost automatically kind of situation, really.
But Elizabeth, let me ask, is there any investment in Dartford? Is there, if you look at the social amenities, infrastructures there, is it, would it be able to hold the mass exodus of people to Dartford?
I think at this stage not. We already have the massive Ebbsfleet Garden City development. There's a massive building of new homes. There hasn't been really, I would say, adequate provision for road transportation to take people to and from that development. There's also going to be the massive Paramount Park, an entertainment park built in Dartford again. I don't think there's been sufficient road access to that park. And also the Blue Water shopping centre only has one road system coming in and out of it. So there has been a significant pressure on transport in Dartford. Furthermore, we've got the situation with Darren Valley Hospital, an outstanding hospital, but I think it only has about 300 beds, and it did replace a hospital, I believe, which had about 700 odd beds. So we've not really expanded to cover the eventuality of perhaps a huge influx from London. I'd really think that Dartford is better off at the moment staying within Kent because the Dartford buses are already red, just like the London buses. I'm concerned that the poor, the less well-off, the older will be priced out of Dartford if it becomes a London borough. And the Crossrail at the moment is currently due to stop at Abbey Wood. Kent County Council is already campaigning to see if that can be extended to perhaps Ebbsfleet Garden City, or to extend.
But Crossrail has also got people who are not in support of Crossrail.
That's correct.
So how can a group also advocate or campaign to have it extended from where it's supposed to end to where they want to get it, including where you were talking about?
Well, it would make sense because it means that Dartford commuters would have a very quick journey into London.
Therefore, if you are elected into Westminster in Parliament,
yes,
you would advocate for the extension of Crossrail to Dartford and beyond.
If that's what my constituents want, for sure I will do it. It seems to make sense, but it all depends on what the constituents want. If the constituents come to me and say, yes, this is most definitely a policy which we think is best in Dartford's interest, I will definitely pursue it. It seems to make sense. Also, Boris Johnson wanted to extend the overground system, the London Overground system, to Dartford, but Kent County Council vetoed that because it was worried that would remove the capacity for the longer distance commuters, because obviously Kent, Dartford, it doesn't only take people to and from London. We've also got the whole of the southeast coast and the towns therein to travel to.
Now, presently, what is the rate of a child to school, the school places in Dartford? Is it well enough to take more people if there's no any investment into education in Dartford? Would it be able to hold more people? Or do we have more school places in Dartford?
I don't think so. There are complaints that people aren't getting their first choice of school. There are complaints that with the grammar schools in particular that their catchment area is extending into Deptford, Lewisham. So I think that something will have to be done about that. There has to be some further infrastructure into Kent and into the Dartford area.
Mahmoud, as a former settler or dweller on the council, Stratford Council, what advice have you got for if there's going to be any investment, capital investment in Dartford, those who would find their way on the board? What advice would you have for them?
Well, I mean, basically, it's make sure the hospitals can cope with it. We have enough school places. We have enough road system can cope with it. Because just putting some money, I'd say even a family needs to get from A to B, from work, using public transport, private transport. Children need to go to school. If you're ill, you may need hospital treatment. So all of these things, they need to be in place before you can expand. But what happens, you see, is that if you start linking roads, railway, and everything in, as they're saying, then automatically Dartford will blend itself into London, you see. That's how naturally cities are governed up, is by actually linking them up much stronger. We've seen
by blending Dartford with London. Wouldn't it be prudent for us to reinvest in Dartford so that the people of Dartford will not be deprived of their entitlement? For instance, a child should be able to get to the first choice of his school. There should be staffed hospitals, and there should be beds and everything in there. From home to work, you shouldn't take you more than what it is taking you now when you have an extension.
I agree with you, not only Dartford, but I would advocate that for whole the country. Let's not just worry about our backyard, let's worry about whole the country. And in whole the country, we do need to invest in schools, we need to invest in hospitals, we need to invest in roadworks and public transport. Quite often, people will live very close to, while London is congested, is because fares are so expensive. It's very expensive to travel.
But a wiping off of the green belt, which is, we all know that it supports our lives. If we are going to expand Dartford, is it not going to take a whole lot of the green belt in Dartford? Why not?
We don't need to take green belt. There's enough brand sites already that's owned by British Rail, owned by even large, for example, a lot of the stores actually have land banks that they hold on to. They don't want anybody building another store on it. Well, the government could look at that legislation and say, look, if you're not going to build a store on it, you're not going to build anything on it, we could take this and build houses on that. But you cannot leave this piece of land. There's vast amount of brownfield land that still can be utilized. We don't need to go into the green belt.
Elizabeth, have we got such brown land in Dartford that we can, or the government, if so willing, can invest in housing in Dartford just to accommodate more settlers in Dartford?
Well, we do have the very vexed problem of Tesco's purchase of the Lowfield Street development. That started in about 2002, and at the beginning of this year, Tesco said that they were certainly not going to proceed with the development. They weren't going to add any employment to the area. So we've got a very large area within the city centre which really does need development. And I really hope it doesn't become blocks and blocks and blocks of little one-bedroom flats. There are plenty of families who need accommodation. Furthermore, there should be a parade of shops, and I would say some perhaps commercial space, perhaps some attempt to create an IT park insofar as that is possible, so that people will want to stay in Dartford. There'll be jobs, and Dartford become a high-tech IT hub insofar as that's possible. We've got very good transport links, and perhaps if the Crossrail is extended, that may improve significantly.
While you're still tuning to Voice of Africa Radio, 22 minutes after 7 o'clock on Voice of Africa Radio, in the studio is Elizabeth Jones, UKIP prospective candidate for Dartford, and Deputy Chairwoman Sadok. Mahmoud Fiaz, socio-political commentator, expert in South Asian politics, a human rights activist, and also a member of Liberal Democrat Leighton and Wanstead, is also in the studio with me. I will soon be joined by former MP Lembit Öpik to discuss Iran and its contribution towards fighting the international terrorism. Is Iran part of the international coalition, 70-country strong coalition spearheaded by America to fight ISIL in Iraq and Syria and also beyond? Or has Iran been taken out and the fight is by the 70 so-called coalition partners fighting ISIL or Daesh in Iran and Iraq and Syria. But we are now discussing the sprung of nationalist group in Europe and somewhere in Britain also. We had the British first, Pegida. The rise of Pegida as a result of the Charlie Hebdo murder in France that went on. Now there is this group that is springing up day in, day out to try to deter or stop the growing of Islam in the Europe. Elizabeth.
Yes, Adam.
Series of demonstration going on in Germany and other places in Europe just to stop Islamization of the European as a nations. What is your take on that?
Also, on the 28th of February, I understand Pegida will be marching in Newcastle. They're planning rallies in Birmingham and London. They are very much akin to the EDL, which of course was led by Tom, and they don't quite have the, what I call the street vibe, I would say, of EDL. I understand a lot of the Pegida people are older and perhaps, no insult to anyone here, but probably better educated. Now, I have mentioned before, it started in Germany, and I understand it comprises mostly East Germans. If we do look at the history of Germany, in 1683, Vienna was surrounded by Turks. It was surrounded by people seeking to take over Vienna and to basically convert the Viennese to Islam. That ended. Also, we have a situation whereby many of the countries in the Middle East were originally Christian. Syria, Egypt, North Africa were originally Christian, and this was really the mainspring of why the Crusades happened. In order to, the European Christians then went to those areas to ensure that Christianity would remain in place. And there have been many horrific stories. For instance, we have the Battle of Otranto, whereby randomly, I think it was Murad II, I do forgive me, I've forgotten the wrong person, arrived at Otranto, which was just a sleepy village, and basically took 800 men onto a hillside, told them they had to convert to Islam. If they did not, they would be killed. They refused and they were beheaded. His aim was to get to Rome and make Italy Islamicized. So there's been a lot of aggression from the Ottoman Empire, and we have to accept that and understand that that is a significant and vital part of Middle European history. I'm sure even the Stones of Vienna remember the last time that there was an insurgence toward the spread of proselytizing Islam throughout Europe. Indeed, we have the situation in Spain, whereby up till 1492, large areas of Spain were under Islamic rule. So that there is a history of perhaps concern. We don't know the extent to which human memory, transgenerational,
but the question is, modern day Islam is not fighting anybody in Europe. Why must we have such a group that is trying to stop the spread of Islam in Europe?
I don't think they're trying to stop of Islam. They're trying to stop extremist Islam. I understand that the founder of Pegida, Lutz Bachmann, was inspired to set up Pegida because he, on two separate occasions, quite close to each other, he saw, I believe it was Salafists attacking, was it PKK people, and I can't remember who the other group were the Chechens.
But the PKK is a political party that anybody can be a member of political party. Anyone in any country. Member. Yes. So however, if a member of PKK is fighting a Salafist, that doesn't mean that he is an extremist Muslim or
no. If they are engaging in physical violence on the streets of Germany, he took the view he didn't think that there should be foreign wars taken place on foreign soil. So basically, he said, "Why on earth are we having these huge arguments, these disruption, public violence in Germany involving two groups of people concerning foreign wars. He did not want the idea of foreign wars coming to Germany.
But here is the case that our governments are getting themselves involved and so interested in foreign wars. So why don't you expect it on your doorstep if your government is encouraging or fighting a foreign war which does not affect you in any way? Why wouldn't you expect it in your own country?
Why should I expect it in my own country?
Yes, if your
why? If there's a situation, let's say the Iraq situation, please note, UKIP is totally non-interventionist. We believe that people have to resolve their problems organically their way. We simply do not understand the intricacy of tribal engagement, religious engagement. We don't understand the generational connections between people, perhaps in Iraq, Syria. It's not our business. We don't really understand, and it would be wrong, and it has been proven to be completely wrong for us to stomp into these situations. So we are totally opposed to that. But the very fact that there's a situation perhaps in Iraq under the Labour government, Labour took us into Iraq 2001, Labour took us into Afghanistan 2003, Cameron bombed Libya March 2011 to October 2011. These theatres of war, which of course we say we should never have been involved with. There's no direct British interest. I don't understand why that would then necessarily mean that people should be taking their wars or arguing between themselves in a country where they've sought refuge to get away from that situation.
Well, Mahmoud, the springing up of Pegida and some extremist groups like Britain First, which is patrolling East London.
Yeah, I mean, Pegida, not a political party in the country, but just to put, let's say we will talk about the spread of Islam and Christianity first of all. Let's remember this: Judaism started first, then Christianity started. So some Jews became Christian. So Jews stood there and said, "Hold on a minute, we don't want to be Christians. We're being forced into make Christians." But Islam came afterwards. So obviously, some Christians turned to Islam. Now, as for the United Kingdom, as Ireland it is, if, for example, we had a pagan here, he'd be saying, look, all these horrible Christians, we were pagan, they turned us to this. So one religion came out there, obviously you're going to change from one to the other. Second of all, in regards to the PPK, what the Dartford candidate doesn't know is that PPK is actually a communist organisation, a communist party. So they have nothing to do with Islam. In fact, they're exactly the opposite. PPK is
excuse me, it's not a question of me not knowing what PKK is. I do not know what PKK is. I'm merely saying why the excuse that or reason that Lutz Bachmann gave, and the reason he gave is that he saw these groups of people I'm sure if you ask them what their religion would be, is that they'll probably say they were.
Well, they're communists then, not Muslims.
Well, communism isn't a religion. But the reason he gave is that he was saying he did not want foreign wars on his soil when people, refugees, had come from these war zones for peace and quiet and to obey the law. Why conduct them in a country where you fled to for refuge? Why can then continue? Anyway, do continue.
Against Islam, PPK is not Islamic. They're a communist party. Communists are not Muslim. They're exact opposite, polar opposite. It's like fire and water. They cannot mix the two. That's just a bit of cultural insight. Then the third question came in was about Pegida. Who are Pegida? Why are they coming to UK land? If Pegida didn't want foreign people on their land in Germany, then why are they coming to our land? The people of Britain will give a clear, concise answer. You don't want it, you're not needed, you're racist, go back to Germany.
Well, it's still tuned into Voice of Africa Radio, and it's 32 minutes after 7 o'clock on Voice of Africa Radio. As I did state earlier on, we will be joined by Lembit Öpik to join in the discussion on Voice of Africa Radio as we are speaking now. I have Elizabeth The Rock Jones in the studio, Mahmoud Fiaz, and Lembit will join us. Elizabeth, I saw you raising your hand in response to what Mahmoud said in regards to Pegida trying to come to the soil UK to come and have a campaign or march or demonstrate, whatever they will call it. Is it prudent for us to entertain Pegida in the United Kingdom?
I suppose, I'd be surprised if the march were allowed to go ahead, to be honest. And if you look at the Pegida people, I say they're mostly male, late 40s, educated, and from the eastern states of Saxony. Why they want to come to United Kingdom, I'm not too sure. I think they've got branches in other countries in Europe. As I say, we do already have the history of the EDL, which is now somewhat faded away. And it could well be, as I said earlier, we just don't know. We just don't know the full extent of human memory. We don't understand transgenerational memory. We don't understand epigenetics. Who knows? Perhaps this is an echo. Perhaps the time is, I don't know, time is building up for another war. And
we've been joined by Lembit Öpik on the line with us. Good evening, Lembit. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on Voice of Africa Radio. Hello. Yes, we are trying to get Libe to join in the discussion on Voice of Africa Radio. Now, Mahmoud, now that we are seeing this kind of demonstrations, on Sunday we saw some Muslims also protesting in front of number 10, that the Charlie Hebdo, and then the redrawing of the cartoon of the prophet is wrong, and they shouldn't have done that again.
That did not come from another country. They're people from this country who pay tax in this country, who vote in this country. So they're not like Pegida. They're not like Pegida. These people paid taxes, and they want to make a point that yes, freedom of speech is important, freedom of expression is important. But we are limited in that within the UK law, what can and what cannot be done. I.e., we could, for example...
Mahmoud, thank you very much. Let me get to... We've been joined by Lembit. Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you for joining us on Voice of Africa Radio.
It's a pleasure.
Before you start, Pegida, do you think that this extremist group that are well rooted somewhere in Europe and in Germany and intending to come to London and protest, do you think the protest should be allowed to go on?
As long as it's peaceful, I think that should be permitted. It's all about free speech. You can object or even be offended by people, but if they don't present a violent threat to a society, then they do have the right to demonstrate. That is the fundamental difference between a dictatorship and a democracy. So in my judgment, that's the case. There's been a long debate about this in terms of non-violent extremism. And I think those people in the West who say that non-violent extremists should be silenced are wrong. They should be allowed to speak, because at the end of the day, you need to compete with their ideas. If you suppress their ideas, those ideas will carry on anyway. And I've always believed that. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and in Northern Ireland we have many problems with terrorists. But it only began to stop when the terrorists were given the voice. We replaced the shooting with the shouting. And I think I feel the same in this situation here.
But the basis of the formation of Pegida to stop Islamization of Europe, is it a genuine concern that Europe is becoming Islamic state, Islamic nation? I beg your pardon. Therefore, we have to repel or fight to stop the spread of Islam in Europe. Is it a genuine basis or a genuine concern for any civilized person to join a group to demonstrate?
It's back to the question of violence. I do not believe that Western Europe is becoming an Islamic state in any sense. Furthermore, let's remember that Islamic states' problem, the reason that they're bad is because they use violence and they implement things which to Western minds and to democracies are not acceptable. They have a militancy which is violent, and it seems that they evoke torture as a method and other things such as that. Having said that, that's very different to talking about Islam, which is a fundamentally peaceful religion, and we must separate religion from this violent group. In the same sense that sometimes people forget the fact that those people in, for example, Afghanistan could have said that attacking Afghanistan or attacking Iraq were Christian wars, because the President of the United States of America and the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom are Christian. But we don't say that. We actually say different things about that. So in my judgment, although it may be uncomfortable for people, if those people who want to support the idea of promoting Islam as a religion should be entitled to do so. What isn't acceptable is violating fundamental human rights. For example, the right for peaceful coexistence, the right to to be safe in the streets. And that's where we've gone wrong. I also think one more thing. My belief is unless we actually, and this is controversial, unless we actually engage and understand what is causing support for the Islamic group, Islamic State, then we're not really going to be able to deal with radicalization, because radicalization occurs when people are able to be, if you like, brainwashed or persuaded by IS with no serious, coherent response to that. Now, if we actually have this debate in the West, then perhaps we can actually blow open the discussion in a way which makes a lot more sense to people who would otherwise be radicalized.
But can we have this debate in the West, seeing as anything that is talking about dialogue with any Islamic organizations, you become a target of the press, that maybe you support the Islamic group non-tolerant for this view? Would it allow us to have this sensible debate that would open the can for everybody to understand why now ISIL is getting more support than it was before?
Yes, I think it is possible. And the reason I say that is because I spent 10 years as the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. My job was to talk to people who had acted as terrorists in Northern Ireland. My job was to try and bring former terrorist groups to the table to debate and to stop shooting and killing. Now, I played a very small part in that. Many other people played a much larger part. But I learned the same amount. And I learned that people who in the past resorted to violence because they could see no alternative actually were very effective when they were given the space to debate. Now, it does not look like it's possible to debate. Perhaps it's not possible to debate with the leaders, but there will be other people at various states of radicalization with whom it might be possible to debate. Now, I'm not pretending that what I'm saying is mainstream thinking, but my work in Northern Ireland tells me that unless we try to engage, we actually glamorize the Islamic State, and then people can interpret it in any way they want. And unless we actually engage and provide an alternative view and a form of engagement, there's no incentive for Islamic State to take any different course other than violence.
Well, Elizabeth,
yes,
you heard Lembit Öpik on this important issue that we need dialogue. We need to understand why the Islamic State and other terrorist groups are now getting more popular and getting support.
Yes,
in terms of recruitment. That brings to mind how tolerant we are to other views.
Well, we are extremely tolerant, and let me just make this clear that since 2009, this government has already been committed to paying a large amount of money to a variety of groups to reach out and speak to radicalised youth. In 2009, £12 million was committed to the group Prevent for peer monitoring of people who are they consider are likely to become radicalised. Monies have been spent on government groups called Prevent, Contest, Pursue, Protect and Prepare. All these organisations are reach-out organisations in order to reach out to the youth in this country to prevent radicalisation. There is already a dialogue in this country with potentially radicalised youth. So unless someone actually goes out to Raqqa or Syria and actually engages direct with Islamic State on their soil, I don't know if that's what Lembit is proposing. There is already a programme in place in this country for dialogue. And can I just I'd just like to return to Mahmoud's point about the demonstration on Sunday. I think the demonstration on Sunday was outlandish. These people demonstrating in Whitehall have absolutely no sense of moral equivalence. I think it's outrageous that they seem to think that a cartoon is worse than executing 17 people in Paris. I believe, please forgive me if the figure's wrong. I understand it was 17 people. Perhaps my memory fails me. So the lives of 17 people are worth less than a bit of a cartoon.
Even that demonstration said that.
That's the complaint. That's the complaint. No, that is the complaint. No, that's the complaint. Those are the complaints. That's why people are there, because the people there have no moral equivalence. No moral equivalence.
You're misleading your listeners.
I'm not misleading anyone. You are.
Well,
you're misleading.
No.
Understand, they are not the same. 17 people were killed.
To the ground.
It's not equivalent.
I'm holding you on air.
Well, there we are. You're going to hold me to the ground.
Don't make things up as you go.
I'm not making them up. I'm certainly not making them up. And may I make clear also that demonstration was an insult to our great war hero Monty. Those protesters were hanging off like dishevelled beggars of one of our great
Well, you still tune into
no
Voice of Elizabeth. You still tune into Voice of Africa Radio, and it's 44 minutes after 7 o'clock here on Voice of Africa Radio. I still have Lembit on the other side of the studio in Voice of Africa Radio. Now, the coalition of 70 nations to fight ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Wouldn't it have been better if Iran, as a neighbor to this country, is involved in this coalition to fight ISIL? And if yes, what prevents the leader of the coalition, America, to have included Iran in this operation?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
In my opinion, there are all kinds of political barriers between the United States and Iran, which is making it difficult for the United States to work with Iran. Now, a lot of those barriers have been created by the United States itself. In my opinion, once again, we can have that debate, or we can look at the long-term interest. And actually, Iran and the United States both have a common interest in addressing IS. And Iran regards IS as a big threat. My view is this is a great opportunity for Iran and the United States to work together, despite the enormous political challenges that presents, and to include Iran in a coalition which Iran clearly would like to be in. One more thought, that is that the United States could use this as some kind of a public relations opportunity to see if they can soften and improve relations in Iran. You may not know this, but Iranians would love to be able to buy American products. For example, General Motors has a very high reputation in Iran, and I did a little bit of work to see if I could help with trying to open the trade routes again, because that's a very good way to make things safer and less violent, less dangerous. But this is a good political opportunity to do so as well. Not everyone will agree, and there are some risks. But if you do work with a relationship between Tehran and Washington, that could actually stabilize the region, as well as helping to address this great IS threat, which so many people, including in Iran, feel is got to be dealt with collectively.
Now, the card of religion sets of religion is being played here. We know Iran is more majority Shia, and the ISIL are majority Sunni. And these two, it wouldn't be in the interest of Iran for ISIL to strive in that region. Neither would it be in the interest of Syria for ISIL to grow in that region as well. But the Iran disagreement to the war in Syria, which was being launched by the West to support the rebels to fight Assad, is also a barrier to Iran supporting the international coalition to fight Syria. Isn't it a point that Iran would also consider?
Well, I'm interested to know what the others say about this in the studio, but in my opinion, I actually think it's quite simple. The West has, to an extent, caused the confusion in Syria. The West was very keen to support the militants at one point, then the militants got out of hand and became ISIL. In a sense, you could argue the West is partly responsible for the ISIL problem now. But you are right to say that Iran has taken a different view. So let's get to the brass tacks. Let's get to the simple building blocks here. What the United States and Iran are both concerned about now, however we got here, is ISIL's evolution. Both sides are worried about ISIL doing well. So even if there are historical problems here in the present day, if Tehran and Washington look at where they agree, they could make huge progress in terms of working together and stabilizing the region. Let's remember also, this assumes that the United States wants to have a better relationship with Iran. I hope they do. I think that would be a very valuable thing. But even if they didn't, it is in their interest to help to contain ISIL, which at the moment is gaining a lot of ground.
But Lembit, is America genuinely fighting ISIL in Iraq and Syria? Before the strength of ISIL gained its muscle, the government of al-Maliki asked the Americans to give him F-16 fighters to fight ISIL, and they asked him to go before, if anything will be done, they will do it. The next day, they were at the northern part of Iraq, where the interest is, supporting the Peshmerga fighters to fight ISIL. Wouldn't it have been prudent for them to have supported al-Maliki to fight the ISIL when it started growing than going to the other part of Iraq to do that?
Two obvious answers. The first one is Maliki was removed because he was causing divisions within Iraq. In other words, he was causing many other problems in Iraq which weren't being fixed. The second thing is none of this stops America working with Iran. It could still happen that America, Iran, and indeed Iraq could work together against the common ISIL.
Well, Elizabeth.
Yes,
now
Adam.
the problem of ISIL is becoming a problem for the entire world.
Yes.
Britain has supported just a little. Only 3 soldiers are with Peshmerga fighters fighting in Iran.
Yes.
Our Prime Minister speaks as if we've got almost 90% of the forces fighting in Syria, Iraq, or in the coalition. We've almost used about only 1 bombing every day or less every day. But we talk too much. What is the support of Britain to fight ISIL? Is it enough to support the coalition, or we better keep quiet and come back home that we're not doing anything, just like talking?
Keep quiet, come back home and do not intervene. It didn't work in 2001, it didn't work in 2003. Leave these people to resolve their issues organically. By our very presence, we are destabilising them. I understand that David Cameron now wants to send in 2,000 troops to Jordan to assist. Always upping the game, always seeking to interfere. This is largely because...
Why in Jordan? What is the problem in Jordan?
Well, there isn't a problem in Jordan. It's because the King of Jordan, Abdullah II, is now taking a rather proactive approach with regard to Islamic State, and I understand that the policy will be to send in 2,000 soldiers to train, in inverted commas, the Jordanian
But we've been training foreign fighters in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, all this while. What benefit have we got out of them rather than come in and inflict pain and kill journalists in European countries?
I agree with you. We should not intervene, and British taxpayers' money would be better spent in this country, improving our infrastructure. But may I just add, Nigel Farage in 2012 was involved with a rather controversial email which went out, whereby he said that he stood alongside Iran. He was very much opposed to the sanctions against Iran and opposed the EU's sanctions, obviously because the EU and America have imposed quite significant financial sanctions against Iran. In 2013, he said that we've got it completely the wrong way with Iran, and there should not be any sanctions, and we should in fact love bomb Iran. So it seems, please note that Nigel Farage disowned his email of 2012 whereby he said we support Iran against the EU sanctions. He has since disowned that, but the 2013 he stuck with that, and he says yes, we need to love bomb Iran and get Iran back onto the table to discuss matters and be part of a trading partner and perhaps a military partner.
Well, Mahmoud, with all this, the burning alive of the Jordan pilot, who was also a member, Jordan being a member of the coalition, and unfortunately, a pilot was captured by ISIL, burning him alive. The answer of the burning by the Jordanians is to kill a woman and another, allegedly a terrorist who has been convicted and was due to be killed in Iran. The response of the West towards killing of a woman, a would-be terrorist.
Well, let me first just give a little bit of a history lesson in regards to Iran and America. What happened? Iran wanted to develop nuclear power. The International Monitoring Organization, whose initials and name, please excuse me, I've forgotten for the time being, and the West showed some interest that it could be used for weapons. So they actually put CCTV inside the actual center where all the things were going on, everything, all the production, everything was going on. So it could be watched 24 hours, 7 days a week. We still had America trying to tell us that they're breaking it. And this obviously exploded bigger and bigger in the situation. So we made an enemy of someone that we don't need to really, rather like weapons of mass destruction. Then we come down to what you said about the training, the 2,000 soldiers. Yes, there is that problem in Jordan, but we will as soon because we interfere in things we don't know about. We shouldn't really. Our investment, our money should be spent in hospitals, schools, even if it is in Dartford.
Well, you're still telling to UKIP is now agreeing. Liberal Democrat is now agreeing with UKIP on my show almost all the time.
You were the first one to say about non-interference in other countries. And really, we need to work on this. We need to work on this. And the other thing is about ISIL. You mentioned about Sunni and Shia. Let me tell you this: the report that the French was released. He said, I don't know who these people are, but they're not Muslim. You said Sunni. He actually said they're not even Muslim. He never saw a single one of them, and he never actually saw a copy of the Quran with any of them. So I don't know what kind of Muslim he said, as a Christian, that they are. And me and you, me being Muslim, I can tell you, that the first thing you see, these people are not Muslims. These are warmongering mercenaries. And the question not being answered is, ISIL is getting all this money from selling oil. Who are they selling the oil to? Why are these companies from the West being stopped?
Turkey is reluctant to fighting ISIL. Why are they reluctant to fighting ISIL, Elizabeth?
Well, as they border Iraq, so that may be a major issue. They certainly don't want that contagion entering their country. And also, it would appear to me, and I could be wrong, that Erdogan has a somewhat ambivalent relationship with Islamic State. In fact, his most recent election platform was the clash of cultures. So, he could well have some slight sympathy toward their worldview.
But he was a conduit to getting our young men who want to go to Syria and do our work for us. Libya opened its border for these young men to go to Syria. One of the suicide attacker in France, his girlfriend was able to go through Turkey, through to Syria. Why must we allow these things going on? And yet we don't want to fight them.
It's a very, very delicate situation because Turkey is one of our NATO allies. We trade with
a NATO
Turkey.
ally that is betraying its
could be said, but
obligations.
what are we going to do about it? It's a very difficult situation because we may well need NATO in the future.
Let me go to Lembit. Lembit, the international community reaction to the answer of Jordanians to the murder of one of its pilots by burning him alive by the ISIL. They answered that by killing a woman and another man to show that they are seriously tackling ISIL. Do you look at this as a hypocrisy on the part of the international community for a woman to be killed without any slight or a single criticism by any country against Jordan?
It's not about her gender, it's about the question of the death penalty. And essentially, we're discussing the death penalty here. I do think that there is a hypocrisy in this because if we become like the people we're fighting, what's the point of winning? And in that sense, I think that some rather careless comments have been made in the United Kingdom, in government, where they say, well, Jordan's got the right. What we should actually be doing is thinking about our phraseology more carefully. If we go for an eye, we've kind of given up. If, on the other hand, we recognise that this wasn't the best way to treat the issue, because this brutalises the situation and makes both sides play the killing game, then it may not be so attractive for those who want vengeance, but we have to once again back to say we're better than that. We would do it in a different way. Otherwise, let's just reintroduce a death sentence in the United Kingdom, because that's essentially what people who support what's happened to this man and this woman are saying.
Well, Lembit, we thank you very much for your time with us on Voice of Africa Radio, and hopefully next week we will be live in the studio to discuss a more pressing issue. Once again, thank you for joining us. You heard Lembit Öpik on the other side of the studio discussing this important issue with us. Elizabeth.
Yes, Adam.
Jordanians, we might see it as they are also fighting ISIL. And they lost one pilot. We lost two aid workers in Syria. By then, there was a court case against alleged those who killed Rigby. And those who were coming from Syria, we did not give them the maximum penalty. The boy that came from Syria and was sentenced just last week, wasn't given the maximum sentence because he was there and he had training, and the ISIL has committed, they murdered our British national by cutting his throat. Therefore, we have to put him in 10 years, 50 years in prison or anything. But in Jordan, a woman hanged, a man hanged because a pilot was bent by ISIL, which of course everybody condemned that gruesome murder of an individual who is fighting for his nation. Why didn't we have any criticism whatsoever in this civilized world?
Well, we certainly did. The Guardian, I understand, had an article. Or was it The Guardian? No, I did read several articles criticising Jordan. It's absolutely none of our business. For goodness sake, Jordan has a king. It has its own independent legal system. I certainly wouldn't want Jordan making complaints about our legal system.
Well, Mahmoud Faiz, be snappy. Our time is very soon. We'll be going for the news at 8.